Jedi strength flows from the Force, but beware of the dark side. Anger, fear, aggression. The dark side of the Force easily let flow, quick to join when they fight.
Said the wise old Jedi Master as he clung to his young apprentice's back, a wisdom he had passed on to countless young Force users through his near millennia as a bastion of light in that once proud and noble lineage. For he had been part of that long line of legendary protectors of the Old Republic, a knight of the Jedi Order. He had the privilege of witnessing the Jedi at the height and zenith of their power, and he had the misfortune of watching it all turn to ash. But through it all, his faith in the light side of the Force never wavered. This boy, so much potential, but
much anger in him. Like his father.
The boy needed to learn the unyielding self-control and denial that was required of the Jedi. He needed to be chastened and reminded of the danger.
Once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. Consume you it will, as it did Obi-Wan's apprentice.
But was it a strict adherence to ancient Jedi dogma that eventually led to the downfall of the Jedi Order? So today, let's talk about the dark side shame spiral and the fall of the Jedi. Chapter 1. Light and Dark. The Star Wars franchise was, and is, a phenomenon. It's a huge business and is, for many, a huge part of the American pop cultural experience. That aside, they're very simple and fun fantasy adventure stories. As such, the central conflict is also very simple. Rebels versus Empire. Good versus evil. Light versus dark. That simplicity made it accessible to viewers of all ages. However, the themes were not only the overt battles between good and evil, but the internal battle between the light and dark in the hearts of our characters. The Jedi Knights of the Old Republic thought the best way to combat the dark side, both literally and metaphorically, was to draw a hard line in the sand. This is the light and that the dark, and
once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. Consume you it will.
Over 3 trilogies, we've seen 3 characters face this test. Only one failed. But what a truly spectacular failure it was. Anakin Skywalker, the Chosen One of the most renowned and revered Jedi heroes to grace the galaxy. His fall heralded the end of the Jedi Order as it once was, and brought with it decades of oppression. What if it wasn't merely the machinations of Palpatine, but the Jedi Order's constant rebukes that ultimately killed Anakin and birthed Darth Vader? Chapter 2. Strict Dogma and Stagnation. One of the great points many Star Wars fans notice is that while the Jedi Order at the time of the fall of the Republic was likely at its most powerful, it was also in a state of stagnation.
For over 1,000 generations, the Jedi Knights were the guardians of peace and justice in the Old Republic. Before the dark times. Before the Empire.
Not only had the Jedi grown powerful in their understanding and use of the Force, they had grown powerful as a pillar within the Republic. Were they a religious order? Soldiers? Diplomats? Cogs in the governmental and institutional process? The answer to all of those is yes. The Jedi were used as a panacea to whatever ailed the Republic, and I think they enjoyed being integral to the giant apparatus that was the Old Republic. They had earned their trusted seat of influence in the Republic with the blood and service of the Jedi who came before. Those who fought and died over countless thousands of years against enemies that would threaten the very fabric of galactic civilization. But nestled so deeply within the governmental machine, they could more efficiently and effectively serve in their role as guardians of the Republic and beacons of light, right? The Jedi had done such fine jobs as guardians. The Republic experienced 1,000 years of peace and prosperity. But such a long period of peace and stability brought about something which can be just as dangerous. Complacency and stagnation. The Jedi had proven their worth time and time again in battle. Legends tell of the defeat of Darth Bane and the Sith. The Jedi had quashed the greatest threats ever to face galactic civilization and were at their most mighty and wise. They were victorious, and therefore the continuation of their philosophy must be the will of the Force. But for all their love of peering into the future, the Jedi were paradoxically unwilling to reflect on their own order and evolve with the times. It worked. It worked when the situation was at its most dire, and it was our order which utterly quashed the darkness. The Jedi were still mortal men and women, and as our own world shows, when we mortals find something which works, why change? An example of their own arrogant mindset that even a moment of introspection would have told them was not in keeping with their own code of ethics. Over the centuries, Jedi dogma would be taught and reinforced to the countless Force sensitives who would pass through the Jedi Temple, from youngling, those that were lucky to grow from a youngling, to Padawan, to knight, to master, and finally, those who would join the Force in death. And much like religious sects in our own world, the Jedi relied on a potent weapon to push back the darkness. Not the lightsaber, but shame. Shame is a near universal tool to teach beliefs and reinforce socially acceptable behavior. A potent spice, used in moderation, shame can achieve behavioral change and instill desired social norms. Indeed, we may internalize such admonishments so completely that the norms and expectations laid on us by our parents in childhood continue to affect us well into adulthood. But too much or misused, and the results of shaming can be disastrous. And if there's anything that can be said about the Jedi Order at the time of the Clone Wars, it was that they loved sitting on high and condescending down upon those who strayed from the path. A path well trodden, and therefore the only way to be a representative of the light. In particular, they seem to take a strange satisfaction in reprimanding the admittedly overly arrogant and proud Anakin Skywalker. Anakin was nothing short of a giant exception in the history of not only the Jedi Order, but the galaxy at large. Immaculately conceived either due to the dark arts of Darth Plagueis, or as the Force's repudiation of Plagueis' audacious attempt to manipulate it in such a blasphemous way. Anakin was then allowed to enter the Jedi Order well past the usually accepted age, despite having enough flashing red flags to make self-destructive women swoon. Anakin's age and harsh upbringing before joining the Temple meant, while a fundamentally kind person, he had less emotional stability than desirable from a person wielding godlike powers. In this way, the Jedi's traditions make a lot of sense. If they saw a correlation between certain emotional states and a slide to the dark side, then, by raising children from a young age to check those emotions and shun behaviors and lifestyles which would make them vulnerable to the dark slide to the dark side, they could preemptively halt the rise of a bunch of dark Jedi, or worse, a Sith. Teach a toddler from youth to not be afraid of death, to not feel grief over loss because all is one with the Force, and never become fearful or angry because all is as the Force wills it, and you are sure to have a Zen Jedi Knight with high levels of well-practiced emotional control and perspective. But Anakin wasn't a toddler when he joined the Order. He had experienced fear, grief, anger, hatred, and the rest of the cardinal sins of the Jedi and virtues of the Sith. Chapter 3. If at first you don't succeed. What do you do with one of the strongest Force users in history, as well as the presumed chosen one, who has a background of emotional hang-ups which are diametrically opposed to the beliefs of your Order? The one with a different life experience than other knights in the Order? The one who demonstrated a lack of sufficient self-control and only a tenuous ability to adhere to the norms of the Jedi? Why, hit him harder and bring him to heel. The Jedi, in their stagnation, had grown inflexible and unable to conceive of solutions which were not part of the tried and true methods of their forebears. For 1,000 generations, the Jedi lectured condescendingly down to their young apprentices, and when they stepped out of line, they were again lectured and shamed for their straying from the correct path. But the children they were conditioning to be the bearers of the light were raised at the Jedi Temple from extremely young age, which, much like language acquisition, solidified the proper mental conditioning in these younglings. Moreover, these younglings were selected not only for their high levels of Force potential, but also that they were predisposed to have amenable personality traits, or at least didn't have any undesirable traits. But again, Anakin was an exception. He was far too old to unlearn dangerous emotions like fear, anger, and pride. And while happy and cheerful on the surface, he lacked discipline. Think of it this way. Dogs were domesticated by selecting for the most desirable traits such as docility, obedience, and intelligence, and breeding that into later generations. Over thousands of years of this selective breeding, we created a companion which is receptive to training and behaviors required of them, and then processes to train them were developed which took advantage of these factors. In some ways, the Jedi selection process is that, but with less creepy eugenics vibes. Which of these children would best take to a life of self-control and self-denial, as well as being least susceptible to falling to the darkness? Make them knights. Others with high Force potential, but sending off warning signs, would be returned home to let their Force connection fade, or, if we take legends into account, literally sent off to work on farms. Was it foolproof? Of course not. Every once in a while, you get a Count Dooku whose pride wouldn't be tempered. But Anakin wasn't a case of raising a pup already predisposed to obedience. He was like an abused rescue dog you felt obligated to take in. You don't train a dog like that because they're not a blank slate. You reform and retrain them. Because of their life experiences, you don't attack the behavioral issues from the exact method as the more docile and obedient pups. In education and child rearing, you need to consider a student's individual needs. But again, the Jedi had grown stagnant and inflexible, incapable of originality. It's made pretty obvious that, throughout his time in the Order, Anakin was harangued by the Jedi Council. Despite his being one of the most physically skilled knights to pass through the hallowed halls of the Temple, and the face of the Jedi during the Clone Wars, the Masters of the Order never had true faith in Anakin. They were happy to use him as a very effective instrument of war, but did they ever treat him with the respect befitting a fellow Jedi Knight and brother of the Order? Let's listen to Mace Windu, member of the Jedi Council who has known Anakin since Anakin was a completely different actor.
If what you've told me is true, you will have gained my trust.
What a Anakin is a bona fide war hero, and in general, a pretty good guy. He's certainly hot-tempered, but he also usually tries to do the right thing. I mean, yeah, Anakin massacred a bunch of sand people and seems awfully pro-fascism, but the other Jedi didn't know that. They don't really have a reason to distrust Anakin aside from the fact they don't like him and that they fear him. That's right, the Council feared Anakin, but they would never admit that they were afraid because they were the high and mighty Jedi Council, and they would never succumb to such a base and dark emotion. That fear of his future and mental stability led them to keep him at arm's length. Now, to be clear, Anakin, while a generally amicable fellow, was still an extremely haughty man with a lot of inner turmoil. He was very aware of his own abilities in relation to the average Jedi, and more than that, was very aware that he was the chosen one. It's almost like you shouldn't let people believe they're Space Jesus. It tends to make one a little arrogant, but also the pressure to live up to that status would crush anyone. Anakin was balancing the fact that he was the chosen one, and therefore had to bear the responsibility to be better, with the fact that he was never good enough in the eyes of the Jedi aside from Obi-Wan. No matter how many times Anakin proved himself, it was never enough, and every mistake was only proof that Anakin was somehow a failure. This fed further into his shame spiral, which eventually led to the dark side. Dr. Peg O'Connor, in a statement very similar to Yoda's assertion, wrote, "Shame is corrosive and spreads widely and deeply. A person will see everything about herself through the lens of shame. In many ways, she is governed by shame." All the Masters had to do was treat the veteran war hero with a bit more consideration and a modicum of dignity. Or, at the very least, practice the patience and wisdom they preach. For example, here's a classic and ever-memeable scene.
You are on this council, but we do not grant you the rank of master.
What? How can you do this? This is outrageous. It's unfair. How can you be on the council and not be a master?
Take a seat, young Skywalker.
Forgive me, Master.
Members of the council slap Anakin down like a child. Now, was he acting like a child?
Almost definitely.
But these are Jedi Masters, the wisest, the most virtuous, the exemplars of the Jedi Code, and also the teachers for a generation of new Jedi. Would it have stopped Anakin's fall? Maybe not, but they didn't have to help give him a shove off the edge. Part of being a teacher is leading by example, and the council couldn't demonstrate the requisite calm composure they demanded of their knights. This was Anakin, the black sheep of the Order. The guy that they only let in because the revered Qui-Gon Jinn had vouched for him, and the ever-reliable Obi-Wan promised to keep an eye on him. Frankly, the Masters just didn't know what to do with Anakin. He scared them with his temper. He amazed them with his skill and raw power. He frustrated them with his pride. He brought honor to them with his feats in combat. And after millennia of dealing with problems in one way, with only a single method of rearing young Jedi, the Masters just continued to do what they'd always done, with more fervor in the hopes of finally humbling the Chosen One. Hoping against hope that he would finally emerge as the destined child of light long prophesized, and not yet seeing that they were setting the stage for Darth Vader. And so it went. Year after year, the hot-blooded Anakin would make a mistake, and the Jedi Council would be sure he knew he was a disappointment. Chapter 4. Shame as a lubricant to the dark side. The Scientific American states that, "We feel shame when we violate the social norms we believe in. At such moments, we feel humiliated, exposed, and small, and are unable to look another person in the eye. We want to sink into the ground and disappear." Throughout episodes 2 and 3, we see that Anakin is aware that his impulses and the way he feels, the extremes of emotion, are not in keeping with how a Jedi should feel. He may not have been good at controlling himself, but it doesn't mean he didn't hear and understand the admonishments brought against him by both Obi-Wan and the Council. In one scene, he exposits about how he knows what he feels is wrong. He knows he's supposed to be better, but he doesn't know how. Again, the conflicting signals of shame at not being the paragon of Jedi virtue, and the pride at knowing that, even though he's not perfect, he has vastly more raw power than the other Jedi, saving for perhaps Yoda himself. What Anakin needed was not more scolding, but a more astute and perceptive mentor. Obi-Wan, for all his greatness and brotherhood with the troubled Anakin, failed him in many ways. Perhaps he'd grown too close. Perhaps his brotherly affection for the young Jedi made him lose objectivity and perspective in his role as a teacher and mentor. The Council likely assumed that, as an older Padawan and eventually an adult knight, they didn't need to use gloves with him. But again, not all people are the same. Emotional needs and learning patterns are not universal to all people. They should have realized that shaming was, if anything, pushing Anakin further from the ideals of the Jedi. It follows then that parents, teachers, judges, and others who want to encourage constructive behaviors in their charges would do well to avoid shaming rule breakers, choosing instead to help them to understand the effects of their actions on others and to take steps to make up for their transgressions. But barring that, Anakin's shame continued to grow with each failure, both actual and imagined. Dr. Mary C. Lamia, in her article, Shame, a concealed, contagious, and dangerous emotion, states, attacking others often serves to disown what the shameful person feels. In order to escape shame's self-diminishing effects, expressing contempt towards another person, or shaming them, relocates one's own shame in the other. When Anakin experiences his bouts of shame, he tends to externalize and demonize others, but specifically the Jedi Order. He is keen to point out their flaws, and how in fact they fear him. He lashes out at Obi-Wan and even Padme because he knows he has crossed a point of no return. But he also doesn't want to have to be ashamed of what he did. He doesn't want to have to think about it. He doesn't want to hate himself, so he tries to reassign his hatred to others. Any situation that devalues the self and triggers shame can also trigger anger and even rage. This includes situations that incite envy, stir up comparisons, evoke a fear of abandonment, or rouse fantasies about a rival's relative happiness, among other things. Anakin's shame has turned into hatred, and whether hatred of others or hatred at himself, hate is a potent fuel for the dark side, and, much as in reality, an addictive emotion. But that anger was also fueled by fear that Padme would betray him, fear of the Jedi learning of his relationship with Padme, fear of the judgment and shame he would receive from the Council. Eventually, this fed further into his anger. Why should he have to hide anything? Why shouldn't he do anything he wants to do? He was at the vanguard of the Clone Wars. He was out there making a difference. He was the chosen one. He deserved not only more respect, but more authority. His indignation and anger turned into pure hatred, and eventually, the need to lash out in aggression. Shame is acting as a nice gateway drug for the dark side's greatest hits. Interestingly, there comes a point where, at least in Anakin's case, the cardinal Sith virtues start becoming a self-perpetuating reaction. His shame led to his hatred, anger, and aggression. His aggression led to the virtual extinction of the Jedi, many at his own hands. This further led him to feel ashamed, but further fueled his anger and hatred, causing him to lash out at Padme and Obi-Wan, with Padme dying as a result. Now having realized that his deal with the devil was for naught, and that he himself was responsible for actual atrocities with galactic repercussions, he feels shame and hatred at himself, and thus the cycle continues. Deeper and deeper his shame and self-loathing grew, which paradoxically made him stronger in the dark side. Chapter 5. Shame killed Anakin and birthed Vader. One of the most iconic moments in film history is when Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, reveals himself as Luke's father. Part of the reason this revelation has such impact was because we were told that Anakin Skywalker was dead. Vader had killed him. We would later learn that Obi-Wan had developed a fondness for mind games while in exile.
You told me Vader betrayed and murdered my father.
Your father was seduced by the dark side of the Force. He ceased to be Anakin Skywalker and became Darth Vader. When that happened, the good man who was your father was destroyed. So what I told you was true, from a certain point of view.
As you look into the topic, you learn that shame is an internally focused emotion, both nebulous and corrupting to your self-image. Shame tends to make us want to hide ourselves away. Shame diminishes the self, and when it becomes toxic enough, shame kills the self. All of these things describe the emergence of Darth Vader. Of course, Vader served a practical purpose of keeping the body that once belonged to Anakin alive. It was both a literal and metaphorical mask, to never show doubt, fear, or shame. It was a refuge for that small extant part of Anakin's conscience to not have to face the world. Sealed within, he would never have to face the judgment of others for his sins. He wasn't the brave and heroic Anakin who sided with the Empire, betrayed his fellow Jedi, and committed atrocities. Just as Obi-Wan said, Vader and Anakin became two separate identities because Anakin's building shame at his own inability to resist the dark side, as well as the resentment for being shamed by the Jedi Council, caused Anakin to sink into the ground and disappear as Vader, which was a manifestation of all his worst impulses without a checking mechanism. Chapter 6. Can the shame spiral be stopped? Could Anakin have been saved? Could he have been pulled out from his dark side spiral before it was too late? Maybe? Anakin's eventual redemption proves that it was at least possible. The key was love and understanding. I know, this is gonna sound preachy and hippie-ish, but love is literally the thing that saved Anakin in the end. His love for Luke and Leia, and Luke's understanding and trying to redeem Anakin. Understanding and nurturing are the opposite of shaming. When working with students, broad admonishments, while viscerally satisfying and cathartic for the teachers, often kinda backfires, especially if you keep at it the way the Council did to Anakin. Shame doesn't motivate pro-social behaviors. It fuels social withdrawal and low self-esteem. Wouldn't you rather nurture the kind of person you would enjoy sharing a relationship with? Imagine if, as Luke is dragging Anakin's body through the collapsing Death Star, the young Jedi had just kept poking and shaming his re-emerged father. I know you killed the Emperor and are dying, but you're really messed up. Remember that time you stormed the Jedi Council and killed all those innocent people? Dude, what's wrong with you? Anakin's heart may have again been hardened and returned to the dark side. Shame can be a toxic thing, if not used prudently, and without also being caring and understanding the emotional needs of an individual. The Jedi were used as diplomats for their wisdom. Why didn't they sit down with Anakin and help him work through his issues? They clearly noticed the red flags he was giving off. Obi-Wan, as his mentor, should have also been there to better guide him and show the brash Anakin the consequences of his actions. To help Anakin channel his talent, but also to reform his way of thinking away from those unhealthy and dangerous mindsets. Not that Anakin had to always be held with kid gloves. A firm hand can be used from time to time, as is necessary when educating any child. But more care and guidance for a child who clearly just didn't get it the way the other younglings did. They had the responsibility and capability to nurture Anakin into a better Jedi, and given the scale and fury of the Clone Wars, I'm pretty sure they thought they were doing their best. It just wasn't enough. In the end, their lack of ability to properly nurture Anakin led to one of the darkest periods in galactic history. Thanks for stopping by. I find your not being subscribed disturbing. Have a good day, nerds.